From spooky legends past, down through generations, to haunted locations that hold a ghostly past. Come one, come all, come finders and seekers. Hear the creepy side of NEPA.
Welcome to the Creepy Side of NEPA. I am Dan Kosloski. Before we get into tonight's episode, I have a couple of announcements to make. First, if you're new to the Creepy Side of NEPA, or maybe you haven't had a chance yet, please like, subscribe, or follow the Creepy Side of NEPA on whichever podcasting platform that you're listening to us on. And also, don't forget, follow WNEP's Creepy Side of NEPA on Facebook. That is the best way to always be informed on the latest show information. Did you know you could listen to the Creepy Side of NEPA every night at midnight, the bewitching hour, on WNEP+? For more information on WNEP+ and how you could watch and listen to the Creepy Side of NEPA, visit WNEP.com. Enough with the announcements, let's get right into tonight's episode. Joining us this evening is local author and historian Bobby Masso. Bobby's joining us to talk about a strange stone formation just outside of Weatherly, Pennsylvania. Bobby, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Dan. Good to be here.
Well, glad to have you here. I called you up because actually we had a few people suggest a legend in your area called the Stone Couch. Do you have any background story on that one? Yeah, it seemed like a lot of people are familiar with that story.
Yeah, it certainly is. I mean, it's one that I've heard about, throughout my, basically throughout most of my entire life. So it's cool that, it's something that has caught on, I guess, enough that people would want to know about that. It's kind of exciting. And, it's certainly something that I've grown up hearing about. So to get to talk about a little bit, and I'm far from an expert, but, like a lot of people, I have, things I've heard about it over the years. So, it's cool to get the chance to, talk a little bit about what I know about it.
And before we get any further into the story, it's located right in Freeland, right?
Right outside of Freeland. It's kind of between the site known as Eckley Miners Village, which is actually a museum, a state-run museum, which I'm actually a volunteer at. I've been there for 25 years, and it's between Eckley and Weatherly. Okay.
And do you know how the legend or how the story behind it and how it started?
Yeah, there's a lot of different, legends and a lot of different versions of the story. I'm not really sure which one comes first, or where any of these things ever start. But I always like to say that I think most of the stuff that becomes a time-tested, kind of legend of any kind really usually starts off with at least some kernel of truth, and then it just kind of balloons and takes on a life of its own for various reasons. But,
yep, I totally agree with that, and that's what makes it fun.
Yeah, absolutely. Because people like to. Something I've learned my entire life is, people like to put their own spin on things. People like to hear something and then add something to it, and think that maybe what they have to say is possibly the best possible telling of it, and it just kind of goes from there. But this is something that over the years it's actually really fun, because when we talked, prior to doing the show and everything, I kind of thought, well, you know what, I know a few small details, but I'm going to look into it more and try to find some out for myself and see if that matches up with stuff that I know and that I've heard over the years. And I actually learned a little bit about it myself, but most of what I kind of stumble upon was stuff that actually does build on the portions of the story that I was always aware of to begin with. And like you asked about like where it started and everything. And I think that the one thing that seems like everybody agrees with is that because of the age of the stones that are located on the side of the road, it goes back at least 200 years or so.
Yeah, I was going to say, from what I've seen, they do not look new by no means.
No, absolutely not. They're certainly they're certainly a very old remainder of something that was going on, I'm assuming, in the area around that time. Whether the events that allegedly unfolded near that site happened that far back obviously is debatable, but one of the legends that I had heard, it sort of jived with a detail that I remember hearing as a kid. The thing that I had heard about was that there was a woman at one point who was sitting on the rock formation, which resembles a couch, and which is kind of strange because stones don't naturally tend to resemble man-made objects.
Right.
So you're not going to come across a stone that looks like a telephone booth or something.
So that's strange right from the get-go.
But in this case, I guess there was this stone structure that resembles what a modern couch kind of does, and from what I always had heard, going back to maybe being 8, 9, 10 years old, was that at one point there was a woman who sat on the couch and she had a small child with her. In some instances, the child is supposed to have been a baby. In other instances, it was a little bit older than that, maybe 3, 4 years old, 5 years old. And for some unknown reason, the woman murdered her child. That was the one that I'd always heard about as a kid, which, right away when you're 6 or 7 or 8 or whatever, when you hear something like that, you're like, well, that's pretty terrifying.
Yeah, sure.
Right there. So no, I had never heard why that supposedly happened. The typical stuff. She was insane. She wasn't feeling well. The child was crying, and in a fit of desperation, she hit it or did something. And whether she meant to kill the child or not, that's the other thing. Who knows? But at some point, that was what I had. Probably the earliest memory I have of ever hearing about the stone couch was that a woman murdered her child on it. That was one thing that I'd always heard about growing up.
And one more question I have about the couch as we're going along here. And this isn't really like in a populated area. It's more of a wooded area, right? This couch is located in?
Yeah, it's very wooded. It's along, a stretch of road that if anybody is familiar with, there's an area called like the Weatherly Hill Climb. It's a very steep pitch, part of it's mountain road, and it's very, very steep. And obviously that's where you would would get you into Weatherly. This is a little bit before that. So like I said, it's kind of between Eckley and Weatherly. And it is, even now, I mean, obviously it's 2025, and there's a lot more traffic these days, certainly than there was 200 years ago.
Yep.
But even now, there's a lot of times you can, go by there. You could travel through that area, and depending on when you go through, you might be the only car on the road. So it doesn't seem like it's a very heavily traveled roadway, at least in the sense where you could expect to see a lot of traffic most of the time. You might see some cars going by there, but in my experience driving by, it's not usually too hectic when you're driving through there.
So that just adds to that story even more when you hear of a murder or a legend of that sort happening on a desolated road.
For sure, absolutely, and I think that might also be part of why the legend even got to become a legend to begin with. That it has the earmarks of or at least it has the makings for what could be a great story. You have a reported incident of something very sinister occurring in that spot, and then it happens to be in the middle of nowhere, which is, for a lot of people, it's creepy to be by yourself. Some people like solitude, other people find it really unnerving, I guess, and
Yep.
And so therefore it makes it a little bit more nerve-wracking to picture like a real evil deed being carried out somewhere so isolated.
So after that story started, the whole legend of the stone couch, is it said to be cursed now?
That's always been the other thing, that it's cursed. I mean, that was something I heard, from early on in my life, was that if you ever go out there, which I had no idea where it was up until I was probably a teenager, and but I'd always heard, like, don't mess around on that, it's cursed. People lay down on that couch and they die, or people sit on it and they die. And it always seemed like it was like the worst possible scenario, that if you touch it or you go near it, or especially if you sit on it, something really terrible is going to happen to you. That's always something I've heard.
Yeah, and that sort of just that takes the story throughout time, especially people adding that little something to it themselves.
Right, absolutely. And one of the things that I found really interesting was, and I have to give credit to a friend of mine who's also a fellow historian. His name is Bob Vibrenner. He's from the Tamaqua area, and Bob actually did an interview for, I believe it was Times News Online, I think in 2014, and he provided a lot of details. He, I guess, had done some research on it because he's, like I said, a local historian, really loves the area, loves our history, particularly anthracite mining history. That's our sort of our shared passion is anthracite mining history. But there's a lot of other legends and myths, of course, in this area, and this is one of them that I guess he looked into. And when I looked up his research on it, I found that one of the versions of the story that he's familiar with, and this is readily available online for anyone to check out, is that apparently it was thought that there was an Indian woman, a Native American woman, again 250 years ago, who had been hiking up the mountain, and she was carrying, I think the article refers to it as like a papoose, like a little sack on her back that I guess carried her young child. And she was, hiking up the mountain, and she reached the area known as the Stone Couch, the rock formation. She decided to stop, sit down, tried to feed the child, and she discovered that the child had died, I guess, through all the exertion of climbing up the mountain, or maybe just the elements, but the baby died. And at that point, she was so bereft that she decided to put a curse on the couch, and that's where one legend comes from. That's why it's actually haunted.
I always like hearing these local legends, like the one of the stone couch we're talking about today. How there's different versions of different stories, how it all started.
Yeah, and she, and like I said too, you look at people, if someone is somewhere along the line, if someone did decide to get creative with it or play it up, that would make sense, because you take elements of things that are true about an area. Back then, there were Delaware Indians, there were a lot of other different tribes, I believe, of Indians and Native Americans in the area, and so that was one of them, that there was this Delaware Indian woman, and that's what happened. Another one, which is actually a little bit, I guess you'd say, more recent, is and this also is something that my friend Bob had apparently come across. I had never heard this version of the story, but apparently it was thought that in 1918, when the Spanish flu epidemic was everywhere, a man actually had placed the boulders together in that area so that his family had a place to rest. The reason was because his wife and child had a fever, and he put them in the car. As obviously 1918, the cars were pretty rudimentary, but
yeah, they're pretty early automobiles there.
Yeah, right. And he put them in the car, and whatever type he had, and I guess the story goes that he was trying to drive them to the nearest doctor, which I guess would have been in the town of Weatherly, and at some point a wheel broke off of the car, and he realized he'd have to go ahead by foot. So he noticed that there was these large boulders, and he somehow had a lever of some kind that he was able to use to apparently push them together. And so his wife and his child could have a place to rest. And he took him hours, I guess, to get to Weatherly. And by the time he came back, unfortunately, both the woman and the child were dead. And it said that he died soon after because of grief. And his spirit is the one. Now people will claim that his spirit is said to still wander, the woods around that area. So that's another version of the story.
And that one's interesting because it kind of explains the formation of it.
Right. There's a setup there. And when I read that, I what I found interesting was the fact that it mentioned specifically that this man, whoever he was, apparently had found or had a lever or some kind of a large pole. And I thought, well, that's certainly a strange thing to be carrying, in your car with you, So that would beg the question, well, if that is true, then where did it come from? Did there just happen to be some large, rod or some kind of pole in the area? And if so, what would it have been? Why would it have been there? So maybe I'm looking at it wrong, but I'm sitting there thinking, I'm more interested to know where the heck this pole came from,
I agree.
Yeah. So I'm kind of like veering off from the couch, just kind of sitting here wondering about, about the, about whatever he used, because those are huge stones, they're
Yeah, that's
real
not
big,
something
heavy.
you're moving easily.
Yeah. And if he's trying to, be quick about it to get to the doctor for his family's sake, it seems like that'd be kind of like an awful waste of time. And like, maybe that's part of the reason why they died, is because he took too long putting the stones together. But, he could have maybe done just like a stone chair or a stone seat. I don't think he had to go as far as to make the entire couch. But he's a family man, and he wanted to make sure his family was comfortable. And then there was one that I came across that this one, it was apparently printed in 2020, but I forget exactly where the source is. But this one is a little bit closer to something I had heard also when I was, younger. Like I said, you hear different versions of things. And this one says that there was a mother, again, and her child, and they were riding in a stagecoach. So to me, that would place the story, even, pre 1918. I don't think that stagecoaches were all that common, by that period.
Yeah,
so,
when you say stagecoach, I'm thinking like later 1800s.
Right.
Just in my head.
Could have. Absolutely. And that's what went through my mind when I heard this. And so apparently the mother and a child were riding together in a stagecoach and on the mountain. And just as they kind of got to the top of it, discovered that the child had died for some reason during the trip. And she was so distraught that she actually took her life on or near the couch. So then there's, and I'd heard, that the part about the stagecoach, I think it was new to me, but the part about a woman who lost a child and then she took her own life, that was like another version of the story that, like I said, I'd heard from years ago. That it wasn't, I always either heard the version where the woman murdered the young child sitting there, or the one where, the mother discovered that some mother discovered that her child had died, and as a result, she took her life. So that kind of goes along more with that other version of the tale that I've always heard.
No matter the tale, it definitely seems like there's a lot of death surrounding this stone formation.
It would certainly seem like that, yeah, for sure. To me, it's I would hope that none of it's true. I hope that it's just there was a lot easier or more innocent solution to it. But I think the idea, personally, of the legend of the couch is actually more of a good thing. It's more of a plus for our area. I think it's actually more of like a good thing because. I think it just adds to the excitement. I think it adds to the mystique of this area, this part of NEPA. A lot of places, towns, cities, all like to have something that they're known for, and I think if you could have multiple things, and that's even better. If you have a famous person who maybe came from a certain area, if you have a particular invention, maybe that was, created in a certain area. That's great. Those are all good things, famous sports team or something. And then something like this, which is kind of its own unique little area, and it's like its own little corner of something strange. And everybody, I think, loves, no matter who you are. I've always found people seem to like, everyone has at least a slight interest in the strange or the peculiar.
Yep, so. I totally agree with you. And everyone seems to have a story to share.
Absolutely, for sure.
Like you just mentioned, all these stories they make the area unique.
Yeah, it's really, really cool. Again, like I said, if any of the tragic, setups of them are accurate, then that certainly isn't a positive. But I just think it kind of just goes hand in hand with other things that have supposedly happened in the area too, where you get into people who have met a tragic end over something, or when a tragic event occurs, there's some kind of repercussion even on a spiritual level or a spiritual sense that. As a result of this terrible thing occurring, there's bad luck, bad karma, bad something kind of lingering about. And I think that that's why you still hear now, like there's always these residuals, even with Stone Couch, that, you hear people say, oh, if I take a picture there's always orbs in the photo. Or one of the things I came across myself was that there's a report that sometimes people claim that they'll see just headlights appear out of nowhere. And they don't belong to any particular vehicle. They just kind of disappear. Other ones
that's
say
interesting
that,
also.
yeah, yeah, and maybe that goes along with, like I said, with the automobile one,
Yep.
the automobile story. People say that they'll actually see a man, the ghostly figure of a man walking that road that could have been that father. Others say they think they see a Native American woman in the woods, or at night, if you listen closely, you could actually hear a mother crying for her child. So, you get those parts of the tale as well.
Yep, and with all these legends, I know back when we're talking, these legends started 1800s, early 1900s, they really didn't record this information very well. But if you really do your research, it seems like all these legends spark from some part of historical fact.
Absolutely. Yep. And that seems, I think, kind of part and parcel with most, like I said, with most legends that exist for just about anything. There's always some kernel of truth that starts it off, and then it just it takes on a life of its own.
Now, I know you said you're a local historian. Besides the couch, is there any other local legends that sort of stuck in your mind in that area?
One of them, and maybe we even, touched on this in a previous episode, but one of the big ones that I'm always very intrigued by is the mysterious handprint from the Carbon County prison.
We did touch on that one a little bit in the very beginning when we started, because I started this show, I may say, let's see here, 2019. So about 6 years ago now, 5-6 years ago. And when I started, I figured I'm going to do a show about 4 or 5 episodes right around Halloween time and see how it goes. I was shocked at the turnout we were getting for the show, and I kept it going now for 5-6 years, year round, and that was one of the first stories. We just touched on a little bit.
Okay. Yeah. Well, I mean, congratulations, because, obviously you yourself, I think, have touched on, like I said, a subject just in general, the supernatural, the paranormal, that people, whether they like to admit it openly or not, it's kind of like aliens. It's like, some people say, hey, I have no problem telling you I'm into this, or other people say, I wouldn't tell you in public, but privately. Yeah, I think that stuff is pretty fascinating, and to me, the mysterious handprint was always one. I think, just again, like I said, because of my ties, my history with anthracite coal mining history, and that goes to my being a member at Eckley Miners Village and the Eckley Players theater group there. We've had the occasion to actually reenact or recreate the story behind Alec Campbell's handprint from the Carbon County prison a couple different times. And a few years ago, I actually wrote a play about it, like more full length, to commemorate the 140th anniversary of what the event leading up to that was called the Day of the Rope. So that one, the very fact that handprint remains there, I've seen it myself in person. I just think it's really unique. So that's always probably one of my like favorite, is it true, is it not kind of things that I always find really fascinating.
I find that story very unique also. I never had the pleasure of actually seeing the handprint myself. I was in probably Jim Thorpe, I would say maybe a dozen times over the past few years. And every time I was there, I happened to always miss the jail. Yeah. Either they're closed, I think they were closed on Wednesday, maybe, one of the days during the week, and I happened to be there that day during the week. And there's a few times I was there in like off seasons.
Yeah, the jail itself is a really unique place because just the very fact that, it was what it was. It was a jail. It was a place for people to go, and they'd broken the law. And I think there's a lot of fascination with that. People are often fascinated by jails, even when there isn't anything supernatural or strange connected to it. But in this case, when there is, I think that draws people in all the more, because you have the drama and the excitement of people being, caged up or imprisoned, incarcerated, and they want to break free, obviously. And then you have something like this. And I think the drama and the kind of the allure, the appeal behind this is really when you scratch beneath the surface with the handprint. It's essentially a declaration of someone's innocence. And
right.
I think that's really what hooks people is, wow, it wasn't just a guy who had a dirty hand and put it on the wall. He was doing it to prove a point, to sort of try to prove his innocence. And I've never heard of anything like that anywhere else. I've always been interested to know if there's any like similar tales involving somebody making a mark somewhere to prove their innocence. But the handprint, I feel, is like so unique, and so it really just piques people's curiosity because of the fact that after all this time, it's still here, and it's basically almost 150 years old now, and it still exists there. So that's really interesting to me.
And the one thing I liked about the story is all the things they tried to do to get rid of the handprint, washing it, repainting the wall and stuff, and it kept coming back. And you could tell the story is very unique because growing up, I always had a fascination with paranormal stuff. So I'd always watch TV specials and stuff when they come on, and I remember seeing that on a few national TV specials.
Wow. Okay. So when something could expand outward and go beyond, the borders of just a little town or a certain community and actually pick up, national attention, that right there, I think, shows the staying power of that legend. I think there's probably countless little tales that have come up in small towns and even maybe in some cities all over the world. But if they don't really, expand or increase through word of mouth, they're going to die off. And there's probably countless stories that we'll never hear because the legends didn't get the sort of attention that the handprint or now like even the stone couch gets. So it kind of makes you think of how many unique legends and stuff that we'll never hear because they just didn't make the rounds, with people.
I got to say, I am surprised at the amount of legends and unique stories that this area has to offer in all the small towns and communities.
There's really a lot, and I maybe even for an area of its size, it might even have more than its fair share. But I personally have always likened that to the fact that we are such a historically significant and a historically relevant area. I mean, a lot of people don't realize this, but this area truly helped fuel the Industrial Revolution. Without the coal and without what happened right here in this area, I mean, literally when coal miners decided to go on strike in 1902 for the great 1902 coal strike and decided, we're going to stand up for our rights and fight for better conditions and all of that, it literally ground the country to a halt, and it actually led to, it was the first time that a sitting United States president ever had to intervene in a labor struggle because the coal wasn't getting to markets to heat homes. And so when you think about, people don't probably take the time or maybe even have a reason anymore because history is so splintered anymore in classrooms and stuff, but people don't have even the reason to think like, geez, I wonder, if there's anything really, really, really significant about the area that I live in. Well, to me, if you live in NEPA, you have that to your kind of a feather in your cap that, this area literally was a humongous part of what fueled the American Industrial Revolution. And it was just because of these miners, in part because of the coal miners and their efforts and their struggles. And so when they decided in that particular incident to say, hey, no, we're working in these terrible, dangerous conditions and we're not going to tolerate it anymore, it literally took the working of, labor leaders and an actual president at that time, to get involved, to actually Teddy Roosevelt, to actually get involved and say, hey, listen, the country is going to freeze if we don't get this product back out here. So, that's just one major historical event that's happened here.
Yep, I totally agree with all that. And even if you don't have a major historical event in your area, if you're in NEPA, if you're in a smaller community, if you dig, I'm sure you'll find a unique story there.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. I mean, there's so many things, like all you have to do is, ask around. And I think, especially to me, I always think that's really an interesting way to kind of meet people if you're interested in socializing and making friends. And particularly if you're not a native, if you, move here from somewhere, sometimes people struggle to find commonality with new neighbors and, new people who are around them. And it's hard to find those little icebreakers. But to me, one of the easiest and simplest and maybe most overlooked things you can do is say, hey, so listen, talk to your neighbor over the fence, if you even still do that. I don't know, some people do, but say, hey, listen, let's tell me some interesting stories about this area. What do you know? Is there anything really significant about this place? And you get right into it. Is there anything creepy, anything weird? Because people, and that'll probably be the one I imagine that people have the most to talk about, because people love to share the creepy or the odd, with somebody else.
And when you get talking to people, everyone has a story to share.
Absolutely. Yep. And thank goodness, because without them, we wouldn't have these, true, far-fetched, whatever they are, we wouldn't have these really unique and kind of interesting stories to even do a show like this about. So I'm glad people do talk,
Yeah, me too.
And keep them going. Yeah. I'm sure, especially in your position,
Yep.
It's helpful.
Well, Bobby, I'd like to thank you for joining us tonight. You had very interesting stories, and it was great talking with you.
Dan, I appreciate it so much, and I'd be happy to do it anytime. Thank you for having me.
Thanks again. Have a great night.
You too. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us this evening on the Creepy Side of NEPA. If you have a story you would like to share, or maybe an idea for an upcoming episode, we'd love to hear from you. Email us at ghost@WNEP.com. Until next time, enjoy the Creepy Side of NEPA.
This has been the Creepy Side of NEPA. If you have a spooky story that took place in northeastern or central Pennsylvania, send it to ghost@WNEP.com for your chance to share it on an upcoming episode. We're dying to hear from you.